Marcus Chun pushed open the door to room 307, and what he saw in that split second would shatter every assumption he'd built his future on. He wasn't supposed to see this. Dorothy had been in the ICU for 3 weeks. Stroke, the neurologist had said. Serious, but she was improving. Marcus had been there that morning. Squeezed her hand, promised he'd return after a merger meeting. His fiancée, Amber, had volunteered to visit daily while he worked. Focus on your business, Amber had said with that radiant smile. I'll take care of your mother. He trusted her. He'd given her his grandmother's emerald ring precisely because he trusted her. So when Marcus's executive assistant called with urgent news that required his immediate return to the hospital, when Nurse Patricia's voice cracked with something that sounded like fear, he abandoned the boardroom with nothing but dread flooding his chest. St. Mary's ICU was unnaturally quiet that Tuesday afternoon. Pale winter light filtered through the windows, casting everything in shades of gray. He nodded to a passing orderly, gripped his phone tighter, and headed toward his mother's room. That's when he heard it. Raised voices, one unmistakably Amber's, sharp and demanding in a way he'd never heard before. His stomach dropped. Marcus's feet carried him faster down the corridor, and through the narrow window of room 307. Time seemed to stop. Amber stood over his mother's bed, one hand gripping Dorothy's wrist, the other clutching papers covered in legal text. Dorothy's face bore a fresh bruise along her cheekbone. Her expression was pure terror, her free hand weakly pushing against Amber's arm, fighting with what little strength a stroke survivor possessed. And Amber's face, God, her face was twisted into something unrecognizable. Cold calculation, barely contained rage, the look of someone who'd been interrupted mid-hunt. The scene crystallized in his mind like a photograph he'd never be able to burn. Sign it, Dorothy. Amber hissed. Just sign it and we can stop this. His mother's trembling voice. Please. Marcus wouldn't want. I can't. Marcus doesn't need to know. I'm doing this for him. The heart monitor screamed its warning. Numbers climbing. Dorothy's stress manifesting in digital red. Marcus's hand hit the door handle, pushing it open with force that made both women's heads snap toward him. For one impossible second, Marcus couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't reconcile the woman who'd kissed him goodbye that morning with the woman standing over his mother's hospital bed like a predator over prey. This was Amber, the woman who'd cried when he proposed, the woman who'd spent weekends planning their wedding, the woman who was supposed to become his family. But the woman staring back at him now, eyes wide, papers clutched defensively, chest heaving, wasn't the woman he knew at all. And in that moment, Marcus realized something that would change everything. He had no idea who he'd been sleeping beside for the past 8 months. But before we dive into what Marcus discovered, hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments, have you ever ignored warning signs about someone you loved? Because sometimes the people closest to us see what we refuse to believe. Marcus's hands were still shaking when he lunged forward. He didn't think, didn't process, didn't pause to consider explanations. His body just moved, crossing the room in 3 strides, placing himself between Amber and his mother like a human shield. Dorothy's breaths came in ragged gasps, her chest rising and falling too fast, too shallow for someone recovering from a stroke. Marcus's hands found her face, tilting it gently toward him. Mom, look at me. Breathe. Just breathe. Her eyes fluttered open, confused, terrified, searching his face like she wasn't sure if he was real or another hallucination brought on by medication and fear. Her lips trembled, trying to form words, but nothing came out except broken, desperate sounds. The heart monitor's alarm pierced the air. It's okay, Marcus whispered, smoothing her silver hair back from her damp forehead. His voice cracked. I'm here now. You're safe. I'm here. Behind him, Amber stood frozen against the wall, her chest heaving, her hands still gripping the papers like they were a lifeline she couldn't release. She stared at them, at Marcus cradling his mother, at Dorothy's fingers weakly clutching his sleeve, and for a moment, she looked almost surprised, like she hadn't expected him to walk through that door, like she thought she had more time to finish whatever she'd started. Marcus didn't look at her. He couldn't. If he did, he didn't know what he'd do. Dorothy's breathing started to slow, responding to his presence, to safety. Her grip on his arm tightened just a little, and when her eyes finally focused on his face, really focused, a single tear slipped down her bruised cheek. "Marcus," she breathed, his name a prayer of relief. "I've got you," he said. "I've got you, Mom." The door burst open. 2 nurses rushed in, their eyes sweeping the room with practiced efficiency, taking in the scene. The screaming monitor, Dorothy gasping for air, Marcus hovering protectively over her, Amber backed into the corner clutching documents. One nurse, Patricia, the one who'd called him, moved immediately to Dorothy's side, checking vitals, adjusting oxygen levels. The other glanced between Marcus and Amber, her expression hardening with recognition of something wrong. What happened here? Marcus's jaw clenched. He turned slowly, and for the first time since opening that door, he looked at Amber, really looked at her. She was pale beneath her careful makeup, shaking. Her red blazer, designer, expensive, chosen to look professional, was wrinkled from leaning over the bed. Her highlighted hair was disheveled, as if Dorothy had grabbed at it during a struggle, but it was her eyes that stopped him cold. They weren't filled with remorse. They weren't filled with horror at being caught doing something terrible. They were filled with fear. Not fear for Dorothy's well-being. Fear for herself. Fear of consequences. She was hurting her, Marcus said, his voice low and deadly steady. I walked in and she had my mother's wrist in her hand, forcing her to sign documents. Look at her face. Look at those bruises. Nurse Patricia's eyes widened as she examined Dorothy's wrist, the finger-shaped bruises already darkening against her papery skin. The second nurse immediately stepped toward the door, speaking quietly but urgently into a radio clipped to her scrubs. Security to ICU, room 307. Code gray. She was calling security. Amber's mouth opened, her performance beginning. No, that's not. Marcus, you don't understand. I understand exactly what I saw. His voice cut through her protest like a blade. She was having an episode. I was trying to calm her down. She was confused, pulling at her floor, and I was just trying to... You were trying to get her to sign legal documents. Marcus bent down, picked up the papers that had fallen when he entered. His eyes scanned the text, and ice flooded his veins. Power of attorney. Estate transfer authorization. Dorothy Chen's name pre-printed on signature lines. What the hell are these, Amber? Amber's performance shifted, her voice rising with manufactured innocence. I was helping her with hospital paperwork. The nurses asked me to. That's not true. Dorothy's voice was thin, rasping, but clear, unmistakable. She brought those. She's been bringing them for days. Telling me you wanted me to sign them. Marcus stared at the woman he'd planned to marry in 4 months. The woman wearing his grandmother's ring. The woman he'd introduced to his dying mother as family. Did you hit her? Amber's mask began to crack at the edges. She wouldn't listen. I was trying to help her understand. The admission hung in the air like poison. Marcus hit the call button. Once. Twice. 3 times. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely press it. Behind him, Dorothy's monitor stabilized slightly, responding to his presence, to safety, to the end of whatever terror she'd been enduring alone. Amber's voice pitched higher, frantic now. Marcus, you're overreacting. Your mother is confused. The stroke affected her memory, her judgment. You know that. The doctors told you. My mother is not confused. Each word landed like a stone. And you're not who I thought you were. Dorothy's grip tightened on his arm, and when he looked down at her, he saw something in her eyes that broke his heart. Relief mixed with guilt. The expression of someone who'd been trying to warn him, try and protect him, but hadn't been believed. I'm sorry, she whispered. I tried to tell you. I didn't want you to think. Don't. Marcus's voice cracked. Don't apologize. Not for this. Not ever for this. 3 security officers appeared in the doorway, their presence immediately filling the small room with authority. The lead officer, his name tag read Tony Gardner, stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt, his eyes taking in the scene with a practiced assessment of someone who'd seen too much. Someone want to tell me what's going on? Marcus looked at Officer Gardner, then at the two other officers flanking him, Edward Wallace and Jeremy Haynes, their name tags visible as they spread out to cover the room's exits. He held up the documents with one hand, while keeping the other on his mother's shoulder. My fiancée was physically restraining my mother, trying to force her to sign legal documents. My mother has bruises. She's terrified, and I want to know why. Officer Gardner's expression hardened. He looked at Amber, then at Dorothy's visible injuries, then at the papers in Marcus's hand. Miss, we're going to need you to step outside with us. Amber's eyes snapped to Marcus, wide and desperate. Marcus, please don't do this. We can talk about this. Just you and me. This is a misunderstanding. I saw what I saw, Marcus said quietly. His voice held no anger now, just a terrible, hollow certainty. Officer Wallace moved closer to Amber, his posture non-threatening but unmistakable in its authority. Ma'am, let's step outside and have conversation. I love you. Amber's voice broke, raw and desperate, reaching for emotion like a weapon. Everything I've done has been because I love you, because I love your mother. I was trying to help. Help with what? Marcus asked, and the question hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Help with what, Amber? She stopped, her mouth open, and for a split second, her mask dropped completely. What Marcus saw underneath made his blood run cold. Not love, not concern, not confusion or fear, or any emotion he recognized. Just cold, calculated assessment. The look of someone deciding whether to double down on a lie or cut their losses. Before she could answer, Dorothy spoke, her voice stronger now. Fueled by relief and rage she'd been holding back for weeks. The money. She wants access to the money. The room went silent, except for the steady beep of the heart monitor, now returning to normal rhythms. Marcus stared at his mother. What money? Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. The money I never told you about. Your father's investments. The estate I was saving to surprise you with after the wedding. She looked at Amber with something like pity. I told her. One of her first visits. I trusted her because you loved her, and she's been trying to get me to sign it over ever since. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. The daily visits Amber insisted on making alone. The way his mother seemed more anxious, not less, as her recovery progressed. The subtle warnings Dorothy had tried to give him that he dismissed as post-stroke confusion or overprotective mothering. She asked a lot of questions about money. Something feels wrong, but I can't explain it. She's not who you think she is. His mother had known, had tried to tell him, and he hadn't listened. Officer Gardner gestured to Amber. Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us. Now. Amber didn't move toward the door. Instead, she looked directly at Marcus, and her expression transformed one final time. The desperation evaporated. What replaced it was something harder, colder. You have no idea how hard it is, she said quietly, to get close to money like yours, to people like you. Do you know how many perfect dates I planned? How many charity events I researched? How carefully I had to position myself just to cross your path at that hospital fundraiser? Marcus felt the floor tilt beneath him. The hospital fundraiser where they'd met. Their chance encounter. The instant connection he'd felt. None of it had been real. None of it had been chance. I earned this, Amber continued, her voice gaining strength from anger. I spent 8 months becoming exactly what you needed. And she gestured toward Dorothy, she was supposed to be grateful. I was visiting, caring, being perfect. But she had to interfere, had to make you question, had to ruin everything. Officer Wallace moved forward, taking Amber's arm. She didn't resist, but her eyes never left Marcus's face. You could have had everything, she said as they led her toward the door. We could have had everything. Marcus turned away from her. He sat down slowly in the chair beside his mother's bed and took Dorothy's hand in both of his. He didn't watch as the officers escorted Amber out, didn't flinch when her voice rose in the corridor one last time, still performing, still trying to sell a story no one was buying anymore. He just held his mother's hand and tried to remember how to breathe. The room felt smaller now, the walls closing in with the weight of what had almost happened. What would have happened if Nurse Patricia hadn't called, if he'd stayed in that meeting 5 more minutes, if he hadn't listened to that instinct that something was terribly wrong? Dorothy's breathing had steadied, but her hand still gripped his like she was afraid to let go. Her eyes stayed fixed on his face, not saying anything, just watching him, making sure he was real, making sure he was staying. "I'm not going anywhere," Marcus said softly, though he wasn't sure if he was reassuring her or himself. "Not anymore, Mom. I'm not going anywhere." A doctor rushed in moments later, flanked by another nurse. She moved quickly to Dorothy's bedside, checking monitors, examining the bruises forming on her wrist, the mark on her face. Marcus stood but didn't step away. He stayed close enough that his mother could still reach for him if she needed to. "Mrs. Chung, can you hear me?" the doctor asked gently. Dorothy nodded, though the movement was weak, exhausted. "Can you tell me what happened?" Dorothy's mouth opened. Her voice came out thin and rasping. She was trying to make me... "Don't," Marcus said, his hand finding hers again. "Don't push yourself. Just rest." The doctor's eyes shifted to Marcus, a silent question in her expression. He nodded once. She didn't need to ask. The nurses had already told her everything she needed to know. Down the corridor, Amber's voice carried, sharp, frantic, echoing off the sterile walls. "You're making a mistake. He doesn't understand. She's been poisoning him against me since we met." Marcus closed his eyes and let the lie wash over him one last time. The doctor finished her examination and stepped back, her expression carefully neutral but her eyes sympathetic. "She's going to need to stay for observation. Her stress levels are extremely elevated, and we need to ensure there's no additional trauma." "Whatever she needs," Marcus said. "I'm not leaving." The doctor nodded, made notes on her tablet, and quietly left the room. Alone again with his mother, Marcus sank into the chair, his elbows on his knees, his head in his hands. His mind kept replaying it. The door opening, the scene before him, Amber's face transforming from predator to innocent in the space of heartbeat. How long had she been planning this? How close had Dorothy come to signing those documents? How many times had this happened before he caught her? "Marcus." Dorothy's voice was barely a whisper, but it cut through the chaos in his head. He looked up, meeting her eyes. They were wet with tears, but there was something else there too, something that looked like guilt, like shame. "I should have been stronger," she said. "Should have told you sooner. More clearly. I didn't want to interfere with your happiness." "Mom, stop." Marcus's voice broke. "This is not your fault. None of this is your fault." But even as he said it, a question formed in his mind, one that would haunt him in the days to come. How had he missed it? How had he been so blind? To understand that, he'd have to go back to the beginning, back to the night 8 months ago when he'd met Amber Robinson at a hospital charity gala and thought he'd finally found what had been missing from a successful but empty life. Back to the night he'd made the biggest mistake of his life and almost lost the person who mattered most. 8 months before that hospital room. 8 months before everything shattered. Marcus Chin stood at the edge of the grand ballroom in the Riverside Hotel, nursing a glass of champagne he had no intention of drinking. The St. Mary's Hospital Annual Charity Gala. Black tie, 500 guests, strategically positioned networking opportunities disguised as philanthropy. He'd written the check weeks ago, a generous donation that his accountant assured him was tax-deductible. But his presence was required. Good optics of the company. Show the community that Chun Technologies cared about more than profit margins. He didn't want to be there. The merger talks were consuming every waking hour. His co-founder had just resigned over creative differences that were anything but creative. His mother kept calling, gently suggesting he was working too hard, that he needed balance, that life was passing him by. She was right, of course. She usually was. But balance required time. He didn't have an energy he'd long since depleted. "Excuse me, is anyone sitting here?" Marcus turned. The woman standing beside the empty chair at his table was striking, not in the obvious way that made men stumble over themselves, but in something subtler, elegant. Her dress was emerald green, perfectly tailored, understated but clearly expensive. Her dark hair was swept up, revealing a graceful neck and diamond earrings that caught the light. But it was her smile that stopped him. Warm, genuine, like she actually wanted to be there. "No, please," Marcus said, gesturing to the chair. She sat with the kind of poise that suggested finishing school or years of practice. "Thank you. I'm Amber. Amber Robinson." "Marcus Chun." Her eyes widened with recognition. "Chin Technologies? I've read about your work. The healthcare data integration platform. It's revolutionary. My father was a doctor, and he always said the biggest problem in medicine wasn't knowledge. It was communication between systems. You're solving that." Marcus felt something shift in his chest. How many networking events had he attended, where people either had no idea what his company did or pretended interest while obviously thinking about their own agendas? But Amber's questions were specific, informed, genuinely curious. She understood the technical challenges. She asked about scalability, about security protocols, about the human side of implementation. "You know a lot about healthcare IT for someone at a charity gala," Marcus said, smiling despite himself. Amber's expression softened. "My father died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. He spent his last months in and out of hospitals, and I watched how fragmented everything was. Different doctors, different systems, none of them talking to each other. I volunteer here now, patient advocacy mostly, try and make sure other families don't go through what we did." The vulnerability in her voice felt real. The grief, still fresh enough to hurt. Marcus understood loss. His own father had died when he was 19, leaving him and his mother to build their lives on the wreckage of medical bills and unfinished dreams. "I'm sorry," Marcus said. "Losing a parent. There's no preparing for that." "No," Amber agreed quietly. "There's not." They talked through dinner, through the speeches and the auction and the dancing that followed. Amber was easy to talk to in a way that felt rare, precious. She laughed at his terrible jokes. She challenged his assumptions without making him feel defensive. She talked about books, travel, the small moments that made life worth living. Things Marcus had stopped noticing years ago in his relentless pursuit of the next milestone, the next success. When the gala ended, Marcus found himself standing in the hotel lobby, reluctant to let the evening end. "I'd like to see you again," he said. "If you're interested." Amber's smile could have lit the entire building. "I'd like that very much." He didn't know, couldn't have known, that she researched him for 3 months before that gala, that she bought the ticket specifically to sit at his table, that every question, every shared interest, every moment of connection had been carefully constructed, that her father hadn't died of cancer but of alcoholism, and she barely attended his funeral. He didn't know that the woman smiling at him in the hotel lobby was a predator who'd identified her prey and was about to begin the hunt. All Marcus knew, standing there in his tuxedo at midnight, was that he felt less alone than he had in years. And that feeling, that desperate, dangerous hope, was exactly what she'd been counting on. Marcus didn't wait for an answer. His body moved on instinct, crossing the room in 3 strides, positioning himself between Amber and his mother like a human barricade. Dorothy's trembling hand shot out immediately, fingers clutching his sleeve with surprising strength for someone so weakened. She held on like he was the only solid thing in a world that had turned liquid and dangerous. Mom, look at me." Marcus's hands found her face, tilting it gently toward him, forcing her terrified eyes to focus. "I'm here. You're safe now." Dorothy's eyes filled with tears that spilled over immediately, carving tracks down her bruised cheek. Her voice came out barely above a whisper, broken and rasping. She won't stop. I tried to tell you." The words hit Marcus like physical blows. He looked down at his mother's wrist, the one Amber had been gripping, and saw the marks. Fresh bruises, dark purple against her papery skin, perfectly shaped like fingers. Someone's fingers. Amber's fingers. He turned slowly, and when he spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. Each word dropped into silence like stones into still water. "What did you do?" Amber's performance began immediately, her face transforming into concern, into worry. into the mask of a caring woman faced with an impossible situation. Marcus, thank God you're here. Your mother was having an episode. She was pulling at her for getting agitated, and I was trying to calm her down. Marcus bent down, his movements deliberate, controlled. He picked up the scattered papers from the floor, where they'd fallen when he'd burst through the door. His eyes scanned the documents, and with each line he read, ice flooded his veins. Power of attorney forms, estate transfer documents, authorization for medical decisions, Dorothy Chen's name pre-printed on signature lines, some partially completed in shaky handwriting that looked like it had been written under duress. His blood ran cold. What is this, Amber? Amber's explanation shifted seamlessly, adapting to what he'd discovered. I was helping her with medical paperwork. The nurses asked me to assist since you were busy with work. It's just standard hospital forms. That's not true. Dorothy's voice cut through, stronger now, fueled by Marcus's presence and the relief of finally being believed. She brought those. She's been bringing them for days, telling me you wanted me to sign them, that it was important for your business. Marcus's eyes traveled to his mother's face, really looking at her for the first time since entering the room. There, partially hidden by her silver hair, was another bruise, darker, older, along her cheekbone. How had he missed it this morning? How had he not seen? His hands began to shake, rage building in his chest like a living thing trying to claw its way out. He looked at Amber, and his voice came out raw. Did you hit her? For a split second, Amber's mask cracked. Something cold and calculating flickered across her face before she could stop it. She wouldn't listen. I was trying to help her understand that this was for the best. For everyone. She was being difficult. The admission hung in the air like poison. Marcus's hand shot out, slamming the call button on the wall. Once, twice, 3 times. The sharp beeping echoed through the small room. Amber's voice rose, desperation bleeding into her performance now. Marcus, you're overreacting. You don't understand. Your mother is confused. The stroke affected her memory, her judgment. The doctors told you she might have episodes of paranoia. Dorothy's grip tightened on Marcus's arm, her nails digging in. I'm not confused. Her voice was steady now, certain, carrying the weight of weeks of terror finally being released. She's been hurting me. Every time you left. Every time we were alone. The heart monitor's alarm suddenly intensified, the beeping accelerating as Dorothy's stress level spiked, her body responding to the trauma of reliving what had been done to her. 2 nurses burst through the door, their eyes immediately sweeping the scene with practiced efficiency, the screaming monitors, Dorothy gasping, Marcus hovering protectively, Amber backed against the wall. The lead nurse, Patricia, her name tag read, moved quickly to Dorothy's side. Mr. Chun, what's happening? Marcus turned to face her, struggling to keep his voice steady, to push words through the rage and horror choking his throat. Call security. Now! Patricia's eyes flicked to the bruises on Dorothy's wrist, to the mark on her face, to the papers clutched in Marcus's shaking hand. Her expression hardened with immediate understanding. Amber stared at Marcus, at the nurses, at the call button still blinking its emergency summons. Her carefully constructed facade, 8 months of perfect girlfriend, devoted fiancée, caring daughter-in-law-to-be, shattered completely as she realized she was trapped. And there was no performance left that could save her now. Nurse Patricia, the same nurse who called Marcus with that fear-laced urgency in her voice, moved immediately to Dorothy's side, her hands working with practiced efficiency, checking vitals, adjusting oxygen levels, her eyes cataloging every visible injury with the sharp assessment of someone who'd seen this before. The second nurse lifted the radio clip to her scrubs, her voice calm but urgent. Security to ICU, room 307. Code gray. Amber backed toward the wall, her designer heels scraping against the linoleum, her voice climbing into something frantic and unrecognizable. This is ridiculous. I'm his fiancée. I've been caring for Dorothy for weeks. I've been here every single day. Marcus held up the documents, his hands steadier now, rage crystallizing into cold clarity. Caring for her? These are estate transfer forms. Power of attorney. Financial authorization documents. What were you doing, Amber? Amber's story shifted again, smooth as oil despite the panic creeping into her eyes. Your mother asked me to help her organize her affairs. She wanted everything settled, everything in order before the worst happened. She was worried about you, about leaving things complicated. I never asked for any of this. Dorothy's voice cut through Amber's explanation like a blade, stronger now, fueled by weeks of suppressed terror finally finding release. She kept telling me it was necessary, that it would protect Marcus, that if something happened to me, he'd need immediate access to everything. But I never asked her to bring these papers. Never. Marcus's mind raced, trying to make the pieces fit. What a state. His mother had worked as a school librarian her entire adult life. She lived in a modest 2-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood. She drove a 10-year-old Honda. She clipped coupons and bought store-brand groceries and hadn't taken a vacation in years. What was there to transfer? What was there to protect? Nurse Patricia pulled out her phone, angling it to photograph the bruises on Dorothy's wrist, the mark on her face, documenting evidence with the methodical precision of someone building a case. Amber's head snapped toward her, voice sharp and commanding. You can't do that without permission. That's a HIPAA violation. She has my permission, Marcus said, each word deliberate. You're not family. Not anymore. Amber's eyes flashed with something dark and dangerous before she could control it. Her voice rose, cracking with manufactured emotion. Not family? We're getting married in 4 months. I'm wearing your grandmother's ring. She held up her left hand, the emerald catching the fluorescent light, throwing green fractals across the sterile walls. Marcus looked at the ring, his grandmother's emerald, passed down through 3 generations, given to Amber 6 months ago on a beach at sunset, while he knelt in the sand and promised her forever. He'd trusted her with that heirloom, trusted her with his future, trusted her with his mother. The betrayal hit him in waves, each one deeper than the last. How long had she been planning this? How many of their moments together had been real? And how many had been carefully staged scenes in a performance he'd been too blind to recognize? 3 security officers appeared in the doorway, filling the small room with their presence. The senior officer, his name tag read Tony Gardner, early 50s, with the calm authority of someone who'd seen everything, stepped forward first. Behind him came Edward Wallace, mid-30s, and Jeremy Haynes, younger, maybe late 20s. Both positioned themselves to cover the room's exits. What seems to be the problem here? Officer Gardner's voice was steady, professional, his eyes already assessing the scene with practiced efficiency. Marcus explained what he'd witnessed, Amber gripping his mother, the threatening words, the documents, the bruises. He handed over the papers with shaking hands. Officer Wallace took them, his expression darkening as he scanned the legal text, the signature lines, the dates. Amber's voice turned pleading, desperate, aimed directly at Marcus like a weapon. You're making a terrible mistake. Your mother has been saying things for weeks, trying to turn you against me. She's never wanted us to be together. She's jealous of what we have. I told him the truth. Dorothy's voice was quiet but steady, carrying the weight of someone who'd been doubted and dismissed and was finally being heard. That you asked too many questions about money, about my health, about what would happen if I died. That something feels wrong, but I can't explain it. The words triggered something in Marcus's memory, and suddenly he was drowning in flashbacks. His mother's gentle warnings over the past month that he dismissed, rationalized, explained away. She asked a lot of questions about money, sweetheart. He'd thought, natural curiosity, she's going to be part of the family. Something feels wrong, but I can't explain it. He'd thought, post-stroke anxiety, the medication affecting her judgment. I don't think she's who you believe she is. He'd thought, overprotective mothering, afraid of losing me to another woman. His mother had known, had tried to warn him, and he'd failed to listen. Officer Gardner's calm voice cut through Marcus's spiral of guilt. Miss, we're going to need you to come with us for questioning. Amber's eyes locked on Marcus, and her final plea came out raw and desperate, reaching for connection they'd once had, or the connection he believed they had. Marcus, please, don't let them do this. I love you, Everything I've done has been for us, for our future together. But her eyes told a different story. They weren't filled with love or hurt or betrayal. They were filled with cold calculation, with the assessment of a predator who'd been caught mid-hunt and was deciding whether to fight or flee. And Marcus, looking into those eyes, realized he'd never really known her at all. The officers escorted Amber down the corridor, her protests echoing off the walls until the door closed and silence swallowed the sound. Officer Haynes stayed with her in a private consultation room, while Officers Gardner and Wallace began the careful work of documenting what had happened in room 307. Marcus sat in the hallway outside his mother's room, fluorescent lights humming overhead, his head buried in his hands. The adrenaline was draining away now, leaving behind something hollow and nauseating. Officer Gardner settled into the chair beside him, his presence calm, unhurried, like they had all the time in the world. "How long have you known Miss Robinson?" Gardner's voice was gentle, without judgment, just gathering facts. 8 months. Marcus's voice came out rough. "We met at a hospital charity event, St. Mary's annual gala. She was volunteering, working patient advocacy." The memory surfaced unbidden. Amber in that emerald dress, her smile warm and genuine, talking passionately about improving patient care, about making the healthcare system more human. Their conversation had flowed so easily, so naturally. The instant connection he'd felt had seemed like fate, like something he'd been waiting for his entire life. Officer Gardner's expression shifted, something significant flickering behind his eyes. "A hospital charity event, and your mother was already hospitalized at that time." The question landed like a punch to the gut. Marcus looked up sharply, his mind racing backward through the timeline. His mother's stroke had happened 3 weeks ago, but the gala had been 8 months ago. Dorothy had been admitted to St. Mary's for tests around that same time. Routine cardiac screening. She'd been here, in this building, when he'd met Amber. She knew. The words felt thick in Marcus's mouth. "She knew my mother was here. She knew who I was before we ever spoke." Officer Gardner nodded slowly. "We need to pull security footage from the past few weeks. I'm also requesting a full background check on Miss Robinson. With your permission, I'd like to examine your mother's medical records for any irregularities in visitor logs." Inside room 307, Officer Wallace sat across from Dorothy with Nurse Patricia present as a witness. His notebook was open, pen moving steadily across the page as Dorothy's testimony poured out. Weeks of fear finally finding voice. "The first visit seemed normal," Dorothy said, her voice still weak, but gaining strength with each sentence. "She brought flowers, yellow roses, asked about my comfort, if the nurses were treating me well. She seemed so caring." The second visit, Amber had asked more questions about Dorothy's life, her work, her late husband. "Just getting to know you," she'd said with that warm smile. Friendly curiosity from a woman who would soon be family. The third visit was when everything changed. Dorothy had mentioned, in passing, the nest egg she'd been saving, Marcus's father's life insurance, carefully invested over 20 years, grown into something substantial. She'd been planning to surprise Marcus after the wedding, help him expand his business if he needed it. "I hadn't told him yet," Dorothy whispered, guilt threading through her words. "I wanted it to be a surprise, a wedding gift, but I told her, and her whole demeanor changed. She became more interested, more probing, asking about amounts, about accounts, about how it was structured." The subsequent visits followed a pattern that Officer Wallace recognized immediately. Amber came alone, during times she knew Marcus would be at work. She gradually isolated Dorothy, telling other visitors that the family prefers limited visits during recovery. She brought documents disguised as hospital forms, just standard release forms, Dorothy, nothing important. She weaponized Dorothy's post-stroke memory issues. "Remember, we discussed this yesterday," she'd say, holding out papers Dorothy had never seen before. "You agreed this was important." "I couldn't remember what I'd signed," Dorothy said, tears slipping down her cheeks. She said it was nothing important, just hospital paperwork. "But I started to feel afraid. Something was wrong, but I couldn't prove it." The bruises began when Dorothy started refusing. She grabbed my wrist hard, told me I was being difficult, that I was going to ruin everything for Marcus if I didn't cooperate. Today had been the worst. Amber had demanded Dorothy sign the power of attorney, her voice cold and threatening. Sign it, or Marcus will be disappointed in you. He'll think you don't trust him. Officer Wallace documented everything, photographing bruises from multiple angles, recording timestamps, building a case with the methodical precision of someone who'd done this before. In the hallway, Officer Gardner's radio crackled to life. He lifted it, spoke quietly, then pulled out a tablet. "Mr. Chun, I want you to look at something." The screen showed security footage from the ICU entrance. There was Amber, dressed in her red blazer, carrying a clipboard, walking with the confident purpose of someone who belonged. Staff members nodded to her as she passed. No one questioned her presence. Multiple visits, all documented, all during times when Marcus wasn't there. Footage showed her entering Dorothy's room, the door closing behind her, emerging 20 minutes later with that same professional demeanor. She positioned herself to look like hospital administration. Gardner said quietly. Staff assumed she was authorized to be there. It's a common tactic. Marcus stared at the screen, watching the stranger wear his fiancée's face, and felt his world tilt further off its axis. Officer Gardner's voice was grim when he finally spoke. "Mr. Chun, I think your mother's been targeted by a professional. This wasn't opportunistic. This was planned, methodical practice." He paused, his expression darkening. "And based on what I'm seeing here, I don't think this is her first time." Officer Wallace emerged from the consultation room, carrying Amber's designer bag, a sleek leather Prada that had cost more than most people's monthly rent. He set it on the table between Marcus and Officer Gardner, his expression grim. "Found these in her possession. She's claiming they're personal documents." He pulled out the contents with gloved hands. Multiple copies of the power of attorney forms, pre-filled with Dorothy's information, organized in manila folders with tabs and sticky notes. Printed articles about Marcus, profiles from business magazines, tech journals, an interview where he discussed his company's recent valuation. His net worth wasn't public information, but someone had researched it, circled the numbers in red ink. Then Officer Wallace pulled out a small notebook, flipping it open to a page marked with a ribbon. Marcus leaned forward, his stomach churning as he read the handwriting he'd seen on birthday cards and love notes. Mother, key to access, vulnerable post-stroke, build trust first, establish daily visits, isolate from other influences, present as concerned daughter-in-law, timeline, 6 to 8 weeks maximum. Marcus felt bile rise in his throat. The calculated strategy, the cold assessment, the timeline. It was all there, written in Amber's elegant cursive like a business plan. Because that's what it was. He was a business opportunity. His mother was an obstacle to be managed. Officer Gardner's phone rang, cutting through the silence. He answered, listened, his expression darkening with each passing second. When he hung up, he looked at Marcus with something like pity. Background check just came through. Amber Robinson's law credentials? Fabricated. She was disbarred in Nevada 3 years ago for fraud and identity theft. Marcus's world tilted further off its axis. Previous names include Amber Johnson and Amber Mitchell. Multiple aliases. We found 2 previous complaints from families in Arizona and Nevada. Both involved elderly patients with successful adult children. Both families were too embarrassed or intimidated to press charges, so nothing stuck. Officer Wallace added quietly, "There's a pattern here." She researches her targets carefully, identifies vulnerabilities, finds entry points, exploits emotional needs. She's been doing this for years. Marcus's mind spun backward through their relationship, examining every moment through this new, sickening lens. Amber mentioning she loved the same obscure Italian restaurant he'd reviewed online 2 years ago. Her passion for the same indie films he'd listed in a forgotten social media profile. Her values about family, about loyalty, about building something meaningful together. All the things he'd shared in interviews and podcasts. All researched, all calculated, all fake. In the consultation room, Officer Haynes sat across from Amber, recording device on the table between them. Through the two-way glass, Marcus watched as the interview began. "Tell me about the documents you brought to Dorothy Chen's room today," Officer Haynes said calmly. Amber's voice was steady, rehearsed. "I was helping Dorothy with medical consent forms. She was confused about what the doctors needed. These aren't medical consent forms." Officer Haynes slid the power of attorney documents across the table. "These are financial and legal documents that would give you control over her assets." Amber's story shifted smoothly. "Dorothy asked me to help her manage her affairs. She wanted everything organized before the worst happened. She was worried about leaving things complicated for Marcus. We pulled your background, Ms. Robinson." Officer Haynes's voice remained neutral, but the words landed like hammer blows. "You're not a licensed attorney. You were disbarred in Nevada for fraud. You've used multiple names. You've targeted other families in similar situations." Long silence. Marcus watched through the glass as Amber's carefully constructed mask began to crack, fractures spreading across her composure like ice breaking under pressure. When she finally spoke, her voice was different. Cold, calculated. All pretense of warmth evaporated. "Do you know how hard it is to get close to money like this?" Officer Haynes leaned forward slightly. "Like what, Miss Robinson?" "Men like Marcus." The words came faster now, bitterness bleeding through. "They're surrounded by people wanting something. Everyone has an angle. I had to be different. I had to be perfect. The girl who understood him, who supported him, who wanted him for him and not his money." The confession continued, unstoppable now. His mother was supposed to be grateful. "I was visiting every day, caring for her, being the perfect daughter-in-law. But she was difficult, asking questions, making Marcus doubt, threatening to slow down the wedding." "And why did that matter?" Officer Haynes asked quietly. Amber's laugh was bitter, ugly. "If she told him to wait, to reconsider, I'd lose everything. The lifestyle, the security, the access." "Access to what?" "The $4.2 million she told me about." The number dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Said it was from his father's investments. Life insurance and stock portfolios she'd been managing for 20 years. She was saving it to surprise Marcus after our wedding, after I was family. Marcus staggered backward from the glass, Officer Gardner's hand steadying him. $4.2 million. His father's investments. His mother had never mentioned it, had lived simply, worked until retirement, drove a modest Honda, clipped coupons at the grocery store. Some people who grew up with nothing stay careful with money. Officer Gardner said quietly. She probably wanted to ensure it went to you properly. Legally. Protected. Through the glass, Marcus watched Amber. This stranger wearing the face of the woman he'd planned to marry, and realized with crushing certainty that he'd never known her at all. Every smile, every touch, every whispered promise had been performance, and he'd been the fool who bought a ticket to the show. Officer Gardner stood, buttoning his jacket with deliberate formality, and entered the consultation room with Officer Wallace flanking him. The air seemed to shift, charged with the weight of what was about to happen. Amber Robinson. Gardner's voice carried the full authority of law enforcement now, stripped of gentleness. You're under arrest for elder abuse, attempted fraud, and criminal impersonation. Officer Wallace moved behind her, pulling handcuffs from his belt. The metallic click echoed in the small room as he began reading her rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. Amber's breakdown was immediate and spectacular. She lunged forward in her chair, face contorting, voice rising to a scream that carried through the walls. Marcus, please. We can work through this. I love you. We can fix this. Her voice echoed through the ICU corridor, disturbing other patients, nurses pausing mid-step to stare toward the commotion. Marcus stood frozen outside the consultation room, watching through the glass as the woman he'd planned to marry unraveled completely. Then her tone shifted, desperation twisting into something vicious and ugly. You'll regret this. Your mother poisoned you against me. She's jealous. She never wanted you to be happy. She couldn't stand seeing you as someone who actually loved you. Officer Haynes gripped her arm, guiding her firmly toward the door. Her designer heels clicked frantically against the linoleum as she resisted, still screaming, still reaching for Marcus with wild eyes. She's a bitter old woman who wanted to control you forever. You're choosing her over us. Marcus watched her go, Officer Haynes' steady hand on her elbow, her voice finally fading as they turned the corner toward the elevator. He expected to feel something, anger, betrayal, grief for what he'd lost. But there was only emptiness, a hollow space where 8 months of memories used to live, now revealed as nothing but carefully staged illusions. He returned to room 307 on unsteady legs. Dorothy lay against the pillows, exhausted but alert, her eyes tracking his movement as he entered. Nurse Patricia had cleaned and bandaged the bruises, updated the medical records with precise documentation of every injury, every violation. Marcus sank into the chair beside the bed and took his mother's trembling hand in both of his. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things that needed to be said but felt too enormous for words. What do you say when you fail to protect a person who protected you your entire life? Dorothy's voice finally broke the quiet, barely above a whisper. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I should have told you sooner. More clearly. You tried to tell me. Marcus's voice cracked. I didn't listen. You were happy. Tears slipped down Dorothy's cheeks, tracking over the bandage on her face. I saw she made you smile. How alive you seemed when you talked about her. I thought maybe I was wrong, being overprotective. You weren't wrong. Marcus squeezed her hand gently. About any of it. Dorothy's next words came out rushed, desperate. I didn't want you to think I was controlling or racist, or that I had some problem with her background. I was so afraid you'd think. Mom, no. Marcus stopped her, his voice firm despite the emotion choking his throat. This has nothing to do with any of that. She's a predator. She targeted us both. She researched me, found my vulnerabilities, positioned herself perfectly. This was calculated, professional. You saw through it, because you've always seen the truth about people. Dorothy's eyes searched his face. The money. Are you angry I kept it secret? Marcus's response was immediate, gentle. How could I hate you? You've given me everything my whole life. Everything that matters. Dorothy explained through tears. His father's careful investments before he died. The life insurance policy she'd stretched and saved. Her own modest salary invested wisely over 30 years. It had grown into something substantial. Something that could help Marcus expand his business, secure his future. I wanted to wait until after the wedding, she whispered. I wanted to meet her first, really know she was right for you, get a sense of who she was. And then you knew she wasn't. Marcus finished. Dorothy nodded. The way she asked questions, so specific, so persistent, about finances, about my health, about what would happen if I died. And you were so busy with a merger, so stressed. I didn't want to add to your burden with suspicions I couldn't prove. I left you vulnerable. The guilt crushed Marcus's chest, making it hard to breathe. I brought her into your life. I gave her access to you. Dorothy's grip tightened on his hand with surprising strength. Stop. She fooled both of us. She's had practice. Years of practice. The officers said. We're not the first, and if you hadn't walked in when you did. Her voice broke. You saved me, Marcus. You listened to your instinct, and you came. A doctor entered. Dr. Sarah Mitchell. Her name tag read. Moving efficiently to Dorothy's bedside. She examined the injuries with gentle hands while making notes on her tablet, documenting everything for the police report. Contusions consistent with forceful gripping, she murmured, photographing the finger-shaped bruises. Elevated stress markers. Significant blood pressure spike. Mrs. Chun, I need to ask you something important. Her voice softened. Has this happened before? The physical restraint. Dorothy's admission came quietly. 3 times. But I didn't want to make trouble. Didn't want to cause problems between Marcus and his fiancée. I thought maybe I could handle alone. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Marcus remembered his mother's recent setbacks in recovery, The elevated blood pressure, the anxiety, the confusion that the neurologist had attributed to post-stroke complications. But it hadn't been medical. It had been trauma. Every time Amber visited alone, every time she pushed and threatened and hurt Dorothy, it had set back her recovery. His mother hadn't been getting worse. She'd been surviving an assault no one else could see. Until today. 2 months later, Marcus sat in the third row of criminal court, the wooden bench hard beneath him, fluorescent lights humming overhead. The courtroom smelled of old wood and institutional cleaning products, carrying the weight of countless stories of harm and consequences. When they brought Amber in, Marcus barely recognized her. The polished woman who'd worn designer clothes and perfect makeup was gone. Her orange jumpsuit hung loose on her frame. Her hair, once highlighted and styled, now lay flat and unwashed against her scalp. No makeup concealed the exhaustion in her face, the hollowness in her eyes. The charges were read formally, each one landing like a stone: elder abuse, attempted fraud, criminal impersonation, multiple counts across multiple jurisdictions. The prosecution presented their evidence methodically. Security footage showing Amber's calculated movements through the ICU, the forged documents with Dorothy's information, testimony from medical staff, background checks revealing her pattern of predation. The investigation had uncovered 3 other families Amber had targeted over the past 5 years. One elderly man in Arizona had actually signed documents before his son discovered the scheme and confronted Amber. She disappeared that same night, leaving the state before charges could be filed. Another family in Nevada had been too embarrassed to press charges, ashamed that they'd allowed a stranger such intimate access to their vulnerable mother. Marcus was the first to catch her in the act, the first to stop her completely. Amber's public defender, a tired-looking man in an ill-fitting suit, attempted to negotiate. "Your Honor, my client suffers from mental health issues. Financial desperation drove her to make poor choices. We're seeking leniency based on her difficult circumstances." The prosecutor's response was firm, unwavering. This was calculated. Repeated predatory behavior over years, Your Honor. Miss Robinson researched her victims, planned her approach, and systematically exploited vulnerable elderly patients and their families. This wasn't desperation. This was a business model. Dorothy was unable to attend court due to her health, but her video testimony played on screens throughout the courtroom. Marcus watched his mother on screen, her voice steady but fragile, reliving her fear, her confusion, the physical pain Amber had inflicted. He watched her describe feeling trapped, helpless, afraid that no one would believe her. Marcus glanced at Amber. Her expression while watching Dorothy's testimony wasn't remorse or shame. It was resentment, cold, calculating resentment at being caught, at consequences finally finding her. The judge's ruling came swiftly. Bail denied, trial date set for 4 months out. As the officers moved to escort Amber from the courtroom, she turned, her eyes locking with Marcus's one final time. No pleading now, no performance, just cold hatred in her voice. "You could have had everything. We could have had everything." Marcus's response was quiet, though she couldn't hear across the distance. "I already had everything. I just forgot for a while." Outside the courthouse, Marcus spoke briefly with the prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Catherine Valdez who'd built the case with meticulous care. "We're offering a plea deal," she said, pulling files from her briefcase. 6 years in state prison, full restitution to all victims, approximately $47,000 total, and admission of guilt on all counts. It would spare everyone from trial. Marcus didn't hesitate. "Whatever keeps my mother from having to testify again. She's been through enough." 3 weeks later, Amber accepted the plea deal. Marcus read his victim impact statement in court, Dorothy beside him this time, her hand resting on his arm for support. His testimony was measured, factual, but the emotion underneath was unmistakable. His mother's ongoing trauma, the nightmares that still woke her at 3 a.m., her fear of being alone even in familiar places, his own journey of rebuilding trust, learning to recognize manipulation, understanding how loneliness had made him vulnerable. When Dorothy stood to give her brief statement, her voice was quiet but steady. She looked directly at Amber, seated at the defense table in her orange jumpsuit. I hope you get help. Real help, not for my sake, but for yours. Because whatever made you this way, whatever convinced you that people are just resources to exploit, I hope you find a way to heal from it." The judge's sentencing remarks cut through the courtroom with surgical precision. "Miss Robinson, you didn't just target vulnerable elders. You weaponized love and trust. You identified people's loneliness and exploited it. You saw care and twisted it into access. You made yourself indispensable to families in crisis, then used that position to cause further harm." The sentence came down. 6 years in state prison, full restitution of $47,000 to all victims, mandatory psychological treatment throughout her incarceration. After court, Marcus and Dorothy sat on a bench outside the courthouse, spring sunshine warming their faces. Dorothy looked stronger now. Physical therapy had helped her regain mobility, and the fear that had shadowed her eyes for months had lessened, replaced by something steadier. "How do you feel?" Marcus asked. Dorothy was quiet for a moment, watching people pass by on the sidewalk. Lawyers in suits, families holding hands, strangers living their ordinary lives. "Like, I can breathe again," she finally said. "Like, maybe we can both start over." They sat in comfortable silence, Marcus's arm around his mother's shoulders, and he realized something fundamental. Justice wasn't about revenge or punishment or making someone pay for what they'd done. Justice was about safety, about reclaiming the space that fear had occupied, about closing one chapter so another could begin. It was about moving forward together into whatever came next. 6 months after the incident, Dorothy moved into Marcus's guest house. Not because she needed constant care, but because neither of them wanted to be apart anymore. The small cottage sat at the edge of his property, surrounded by flowering jasmine and the vegetable garden Dorothy had insisted on planting the week after she moved in. Marcus had hired a part-time companion, Elena, who visited 3 afternoons a week. But he was Dorothy's primary caregiver, and he wouldn't have had it any other way. The tech company merger had completed successfully while Marcus was focused on his mother's recovery. His executives had handled the negotiations, the contracts, the endless details he'd once believed only he could manage. The company hadn't just survived his absence, it had thrived. Marcus learned something profound in that realization. Delegation wasn't weakness. Trust wasn't abdication. His team was capable, talented, and perfectly equipped to run the business he'd built. He now worked from home 3 days a week, attended board meetings remotely, and discovered that his worth wasn't measured in hours logged or deals closed. Their morning routine had become sacred. Coffee on the terrace at 7, discussing the day ahead, watching the city wake up below them. Dorothy had regained most of her strength through physical therapy, her speech fully recovered, her mobility restored. But some scars remained invisible. She was cautious with strangers now, hesitant to trust quickly, her eyes sometimes distant when someone knocked unexpectedly at the door. They attended therapy together every Thursday, sitting side by side in Dr. Rachel Kim's office, processing trauma and rebuilding communication. Trauma doesn't just hurt the body, Dr. Kim had explained during one session. It changes how we see the world, how we assess safety, how we determine who deserves our trust. Marcus was learning to recognize his own patterns, the loneliness that had made him vulnerable after years of business obsession, the desperate desire for companionship, the fear of dying alone that had made him rush into commitment with someone he barely knew. "Loneliness makes us rush," Dr. Kim said gently. "We mistake intensity for intimacy, urgency for authenticity. Real love has patience. It waits. It builds slowly." Dorothy shared her own perspective in those sessions. How she had wanted to seem controlling or overprotective, how she'd second-guess a maternal instinct even as it screamed warnings. Their sessions were helping them understand each other's perspectives, communicate more openly, bridge gaps that years of busy lives had created. Marcus had channeled his energy into something meaningful, the Dorothy Chin Elder Protection Fund. The foundation's mission was protecting hospitalized elderly patients from financial exploitation, training hospital staff to recognize warning signs, providing legal resources for families navigating these situations, partnering with 3 major hospitals in the city to implement new safeguards. Dorothy served on the advisory board. sharing her story at conferences and training sessions, transforming her trauma into protection for others. "If my experience can save even one family from going through this," she'd said during her first speaking engagement, "then maybe it meant something." One afternoon in late autumn, they visited Dorothy's beloved community garden. Her first time back since the stroke. The garden was preparing for winter, but her tomato plants still clung to life, heavy with late-season fruit. Dorothy knelt carefully beside the plants, her hands reaching for familiar soil. Marcus knelt beside her, helping her weed, their hands working together in comfortable rhythm. "You know what I've been thinking about?" Dorothy's voice was soft, contemplative. "What's that, Mom?" "How close I came in never seeing this again. These tomatoes, this garden Her eyes filled with tears, but they were different tears now, gratitude, not grief. Marcus's throat tightened. "You're here now. That's what matters." "Because you listened." Dorothy turned to face him, dirt on her hands, sunlight catching the silver in her hair. "That instinct that brought you back that day. Something told you to come, and you listened." "I almost didn't," Marcus admitted. "Almost sent the call to voicemail. The meeting was at a critical point. But you didn't. Something told you to go, and you listened." They talked about faith, about divine intervention, about the unexplainable pull that had made Marcus abandon that boardroom and race to the hospital. Dorothy's belief was simple. Sometimes God protects us in ways we can't see until later, in ways that look like coincidence or instinct but are really grace. Marcus, who'd never been religious, found unexpected comfort in this perspective. Maybe some things couldn't be explained by logic or data. Maybe some rescues required more than human timing. As sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, they sat together on a garden bench, shoulders touching, watching the city lights begin to flicker on below. "Real love doesn't rush," Dorothy said quietly. "It doesn't push. It waits." "I understand that now," Marcus replied. "What we have, this is real. Always has been. Sweetheart. You just forgot for a little while." Marcus reflected on his transformation over these months. He no longer measured his worth by profit margins or company valuations. The business still thrived, his wealth still grew, but it was no longer his identity. His identity was this: son, caregiver, protector, the person who protected him his entire life. As darkness settled around them, and the first stars appeared, Marcus spoke the truth he'd been carrying. "I built a fortune, Mom, but you were always my foundation." Dorothy's hand found his, squeezing gently. "And you saved my life. But really we saved each other." They sat in peaceful silence, mother and son, knowing that even in darkness there's always a path forward. You just have to choose it. Choose the people who choose you back. Not once, but every single day. Choose presence over profit, connection over control, love over loneliness. Marcus looked at his mother's profile against the twilight sky and understood. This was wealth. This was success. This quiet moment, this shared peace, the simple truth that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. If this story made you feel something, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible true stories. Comment below. Always trust your instincts if you believe gut feelings matter. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. Stay aware, stay safe.